Greetings, this is Thomas Caldwell with the Aurelian column, and welcome to the podcast. This is an episode dedicated to questions and answers. Now, I never intended to do a Q&A. I didn't think there'd be need for it, but several of you have been in touch with me through different social media forums, through my websites. Some of these questions have been somewhat duplicated. I didn't expect that sort of feedback, but since people have started to ask me questions, I think it would only be polite to answer them. So here goes. Thomas, there's three questions I'm going to address now. I won't take up too much of your time. But Thomas, I find your mix of essays, poetry, and current events a welcome change from all the other commentators and so-called content providers on the net. But I'm curious about where you learned haiku and how long you've been writing it. And where did you get your photographs used to illustrate your poetry? Okay, the second part of the question first is, most of these photographs are mine, in fact, almost all of them, except the ones that you see, the Hubble Space Telescope shots, which I've used, which are always attributed to NASA, and a couple of other people who've been kind enough to send me very beautiful photographs that I was inspired to write on. So, but almost all of them are mine. And some of them date back several years. Some of them are recently taken. In fact, the one that I got some very nice feedback from today was the one of the two bees, the worker bee one with the haiku. That was taken this morning at a park, a forest actually, in Northern Virginia in Fairfax County that I go to every so often. And I had my camera out, which I usually do, and I suddenly saw some bees around flowers, and I just started taking pictures, and I captured those two bees pollinating the flower at once. And that took a little bit of work and a little bit of patience, but I've been taking pictures of insects on plants and things for decades, and I think that's my best picture of two bees, of any bees pollinating a flower, and I'm very proud of that. But as for haiku, I've been doing that for a very long time. A little bit of background for those that don't know, I lived overseas for a very large piece of my life, 28 years, and almost all of that time was in Japan. So while I was there, and being a bit of the anthropologist I am, I studied many aspects of that culture, including haiku, which just resonated with me from a very early age, probably from my early to mid-20s. Is when I really got into it. And I actually spent time studying with Japanese poets and learning how it was done, but not so much the words to use as the feeling it's supposed to convey. Now, a bit of education on haiku, because so many Americans don't really understand what it's about. They think it's just 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. It's that. But there's other rules to it, which many people who claim to be fans of haiku don't really get. One of which is there always has to be attributions, or at least one attribution to the natural world. That's why all the poetry you see has reference to trees or mountains or flowers or something like that, or thunder or lightning. That's always a part of the requirement. The other thing that I was taught was that it has to come across as coming from one's soul, which is not exactly something you can learn in a textbook. That's just something that comes from practice, meditation, which is something I spent a great deal of my time doing and learning properly in that part of the world. At this point, haiku just comes to me all the time, and it doesn't happen automatically. It does require some thought. But the poem you saw about the worker bees, I wrote that in my head while walking out of the forest shortly after taking the pictures. And I just went back to my office and found the right shot that I took of many of those bees and put it all together and set it out there. So I've been doing this for a very long time. Haiku is, I'd say it's my most favorite style, because it's something that you can put a lot in very few words. There's a challenge to it. But I could go into that in much more detail some other time, but I hope that answers your question, sir. The next question. I remember you were doing the Aurelian column some years ago, but you stopped. Why have you come back to it? Also, can you tell me where you got the name Aurelian Column? Thanks. Okay. First off, the name Aurelian Column is an attribution to Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor. He was a Stoic, a school of philosophy that I am a big fan of, and anybody who's been through some tough times in life would also be a good fan of, and I would recommend it. He wrote a book called Meditations, which I would strongly recommend to any human. And in Rome, there is a large column. I don't know how tall it is offhand. It's pretty tall, but it's a column with sculptures surrounding it all the way from the top to the bottom, illustrating his life and accomplishments. And it's a play on words because there's this big, strong column, and a column is also a place in a newspaper traditionally where commentary went. So that's where I came up with that. That's why you see Marcus Aurelius' picture here and there, and attributions and references and things such as that. I'm a big fan of the Stoic school of philosophy. Now, why did I come back to it? Well, I didn't really leave it. A little bit of background. I started the Aurelian Column with the intention of a blog, a commentary, as it were, mixed with a podcast some years ago. 2017 is when I started it originally. However, I was using an old formula from the 20th century. I would be writing something and then I'd record it in a traditional radio style, as opposed to the more conversational, off-the-cuff style that people are used to these days. It would be like playing baseball and everybody else is playing football. So I stopped doing the podcast because it was so much work and nobody was really listening to it. There was no real distribution. It was at a website and I was getting very little traffic. And I did get a little bit of feedback, but when you put a lot of work into something and you have to still make a living, it can get a little bit frustrating. I still kept doing essays, though, every so often, every few months or so, I would put an essay out on the site, but it was not really working. So I had to reformulate myself, and I finally decided to do that. Now, about a year ago, I heard from another writer about something called Substack, and he said, I see you're still doing haiku, and I've been doing haiku for years, just on social media, just sending out these images with my poetry on it. And he said you should get onto Substack and start putting stuff up there because you can monetize it, you can build an audience, you could do all sorts of things. And I looked at it and I said, that might be interesting, but I was quite busy in another profession, a couple of professions actually, and there was very little time for it. Although I've always been a writer and a photographer and an artist of sorts. That's what I've always been. I've always been there for the written and the visual word. But I kept looking at it and said, maybe I'll get into do something like that some point. And then Seymour Hersh came out. Now, Seymour Hersh is a top investigative reporter. I'd say probably the best one that the 20th century produced, and he wrote that story that was about the pipeline being blown up, the Russian pipeline being blown up that supplied gas to Europe. And that's an excellent story. I would recommend him strongly. And he was publishing that on Substack. And I said, really? And I did some checking, and he got sick of the mainstream media himself, even though he's been around since the 60s. He reported, by the way, on the My Lai massacre, which, if you know anything about the history of the Vietnam War, you'll know was a major story, and he broke that. But he is putting all of his stuff up on Substack, and he's charging $5 a month, which is the minimum you can charge there. And apparently he's doing pretty well. And I know of a couple of other writers who are up there, and they said, your poetry would probably be well received along with other stuff. And I said, So I was thinking about it, and then, but I was just thinking, but I had other things I was doing. In the COVID years, and many of us had career changes in the COVID years from early 2020 until basically the end of 2022, I got involved in other businesses, including security work, armed and unarmed security. Yes, I was doing that, and private investigations, which as a former investigative reporter wasn't too difficult. Now, I was involved in those businesses heavily until March, when a medical condition I've had for some years, and I'm not ashamed to talk about it, sleep apnea, got much worse. And as a result, I was unable to function in overnight operations very effectively. I will go into that in detail. That is a debilitating condition. It's a dangerous condition if it's not treated properly, and millions of Americans suffer from it, and I'm sorry to say millions don't treat it seriously. So that'll be another story for another time. But anyways, I found myself out of that business. And I still have to make a living, or at least try to do so, so I had to get into something else, and I decided, well, maybe I should get back to the keyboard and coming up with things. So I started back in March, putting the groundwork together, and then I started producing material in April, and it's been growing steadily, I'm happy to say. Not as quick as I'd like, and I don't have as many paid subscribers as I'd like, that's for sure, but I'm happy doing it. And I think I have an interesting formula combination of poetry, of both conventional and haiku, commentary on various things such as historical and current events, and also good old-fashioned news, which I'm planning on spending more time on doing, and photography, which I combine with the poetry. So I've been working on that mostly out of necessity. I have a couple of other business ventures I'm involved in, but because of health conditions, I've had to leave that very lucrative line of work, which I enjoyed, but it's time to move on to something else, and that's what I plan on doing. And that is why the Aurelian column is now back, and I'm happy to say it's getting more popular as every day goes by. Now, the third question, and I'll leave you with this, is someone said, I love your photography. Do you give lessons or teach? Well, thank you. I love that when somebody loves something I'm doing. But it's fascinating that somebody I've never met asked me this question, because for the last year and a half or so, some people have been asking me, I'd love to learn real photography. I'm just tired of using my cell phone to take snapshots, or I have this little camera that does everything for me. Could you teach me? And a few weeks ago, somebody actually contacted me to be asked how their camera works. And I'm sorry to say modern cameras are excessively complex, although they're complex for a reason. And that's to give creative control. But I then at that point I asked a few other people, are you interested in learning photography? And everyone said, yes, yes, yes. So I've been doing a few informal photography lessons by lecture, that I record and send out. But a lot of people have told you really should teach and charge for it, because you did learn the old way. And a little bit about my background is I was a photographer before I was a writer. I started doing photography when I was in junior high school, and that was back in real ancient times, in the days of film, and learning what filters to use on your camera to get good black and white images, and how to use a darkroom and all those other things. But I had planned upon getting out of school to become a full-time professional photographer, and I actually worked at a photo processing lab for a while, and I apprenticed to a couple of photographers back in the day. But the thing is, you don't really make much money at it even then. So what happened was one day I kept it up as sort of a hobby, occasionally selling a photograph here and there, maybe through some stock agencies. And then one day, back in the 1980s, someone told me, he said, yeah, I love your photographs, but if you can write a story to go with them, I'll pay you X amount of money, which was not a bad piece of money. So I started writing. And that's how I got into it. And eventually I got into the news business. I was a wire and broadcast correspondent for United Press International. I also did take some photographs for them, but mostly was writing. But that's how I got into it. I got into writing to sell my photographs. And I ended up selling more writing than photographs over the years. I did teach for a while in Japan, not in a very formal open your own school sort of way, but it seems that I was trained in using photography as a medium to express oneself, which you don't see anymore. The modern cameras are so automatic that there's really no you really don't learn much about composition or any of the other traditional disciplines. So the answer is, am I giving lessons? I plan on it at this point. I'm working on a curriculum. I can't afford to do it for free, but then again, you can't, put an enormous price tag on things, especially when it's something as important as people expressing themselves. So if you are interested in learning photography, and I'll be teaching you the basics and helping you find what cameras and things such as that to use, and whether you're interested in getting into architectural photography or taking pictures of babies or your pets or taking pictures of bees or something like that. I've done just about all of it, except underwater photography. I never did that. I never got into scuba diving. I do know what types of equipment to use, but that's the only type of photography I think I've never done. That and medical. I don't think there's going to be much of a demand for medical photography, though, here. So if you are interested in that, just let me know. Just drop a note to feedback@aureliancolumn.org. And if I can get enough people interested, I could put together a Zoom class or something to that effect and help you out. That's about it for now. Those are the 3 questions I wanted to answer today. But I do have other things coming up. First off, I do have some exclusive stories coming out in the near future. And these are for subscribers who pay $5 a month or $50 a year. It's a good deal, and it does help, believe me. And I also have some other things I'm planning, and I do plan on some audio and possibly video in the future. But I'm a traditional radio guy, so audio will probably be what I prefer to stay with. Other than that, I want to thank everybody who has been in touch with me through social media. My preferred social media sites are MeWe. I am not on Facebook. No, I am absolutely not on Facebook. You will not find me on Facebook. I'm on Twitter, MICCAMPEN up on Twitter. You can follow me there. I do put commentaries and some news stories of interest to me up there. And I'm on Gab, MICCAMPEN.com. But you can find me on MeWe and of course Substack, which is turning into being an excellent medium for independent reporters and artists and such people. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for your support. Please like and subscribe and share. If you like what you see, you like what you read, please send it to your friends. It is very hard work to produce things. It is very hard work to create images that other people enjoy. But it is a very satisfying thing, and I want to thank all of you for making it possible. Okay? That's all for now. Take care and good day.